Hi, this is Mrs. Engel, and today we're going to be talking about globalization in the 1990s. So, the 1990s is a really great decade. Why? I'm a little biased. I was a teenager in the 90s, and it is something that I uh, reflect on and smile upon all the time. But the 1990s is specifically unique because this is a decade in which President Bill Clinton will dominate, and he is going to implement a lot of change, or at least be instrumental in implementing a lot of change that is going to transform America big time. And he is also going to preside over the nation during a period of significant economic growth, largely due to factors that he is responsible for, like the development of NAFTA and our involvement in GATT. But also, he is going to experience scandal in his presidency, and that will make him the second president in U.S. history ever to be impeached. He is not the last president to have been impeached. Donald Trump was also impeached for his actions. In 20 believed 18. So as far as there have been three presidents impeached overall: Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and then also President Trump. And then right now he's in the process of perhaps, he's been impeached twice, and then perhaps facing being barred from ever participating in public office. We'll see if there'll be enough votes for that, but that'll remain to be seen. But back to the 1990s. So Bill Clinton will preside over a period of time of tremendous economic growth. His First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, will be very proactive and play a very important role in his administration. There hasn't been as proactive of a First Lady since, I would say, Eleanor Roosevelt. Bill Clinton will take steps in the right direction to try and incorporate more gay or protect, I would say, gay members of the U.S. military. It's not enough to safeguard people in the LGBTQ community from being openly persecuted, but he does develop this don't ask, don't tell policy, which is the idea if nobody asks what your sexual orientation is, you don't have to disclose it, and there's nothing wrong with keeping it under wraps. Today, you can be openly gay in the military, and it is fine. However, in the 1990s, it was something that you had to keep on the down low. So, unfortunately, like progress won't come until well into the early 2000s. But Clinton is going to have to deal with a largely Republican Congress, so his ability to get a lot done is not really possible, but he does accomplish quite a lot with NAFTA and GATT, and I'll get into more specific aspects of NAFTA and GATT in just a few minutes. Probably the most important um, piece of legislation that happens while he is president is that he creates a free zone of trade between the US, Canada, and Mexico. This is called the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA is not dead. It has been renegotiated. In 2020, it's got a different name, but it is still very much, in play, and it is still very much an important part of maintaining the free zone of trade that we have currently in the United States. Now, this was revolutionary NAFTA, largely because this free zone of trade is going to contribute to a lot of our outsourcing. So, what's going to happen is that, take a company like General Motors, for example. So, General Motors, which was headquartered, or I think is still headquartered in Detroit, Michigan, they had a whole bunch of factories there. Instead of having to pay a union factory worker $30 an hour to make a General Motors van, what General Motors did, as well as a lot of companies did during this time period, is that they would close up shop in Detroit and move their factory and establish a plant in Mexico where they could pay a Mexican worker significantly less money to do the same job that would be done by an American worker making $30 an hour. So they can pay like a fraction of the cost of labor to somebody working in Mexico, in a Mexican maquiladora. And so as a result, This will enhance their profitability margin because not only did they pay a Mexican worker significantly less wage, but they didn't have to worry about providing a pension fund or providing health insurance. And then the environmental standards in Mexico are significantly less than here in the United States with the EPA. So as a result of this, this is going to increase the profitability of lots of companies, but unfortunately contribute to outsourcing. So when they produce a van in northern Mexico and it is brought into dealerships and sold to Americans all across the 50 states, this particular van is not slapped with a tax for being imported into the U.S. because it is part of this free zone of trade created by NAFTA. And if that wasn't enough, you have GATT, which stands for the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. All of the different countries that are part of GATT, and then eventually what melts into the World Trade Organization. All of the countries that were very proactive in this organization were important because it lowered trade barriers. So companies not only outsourced to nations like Mexico, but many other countries found, or companies found it very much more economically lucrative to move their factories and their basis of operation to a country like China, for example. They could pay a Chinese worker significantly less money to make, for example, let's take a product that's used today, like an Apple phone, for example. So, a Chinese worker could work in um, can work making an iPhone for Americans, and then that product is shipped to the United States and sold in Apple stores. But because of the low tariffs, the low taxes on items that are imported, even if they're made overseas, it will enable companies like Apple to outsource and to be able to sell their products elsewhere, or to assemble their products elsewhere very, very cheaply, very efficiently, and then they can, bring these products back to the United States and sell them to Americans, and they don't have to worry about affecting the markup costs. So, NAFTA and GATT both will contribute to the rise of box stores. So we're talking stores like Walmart and stores like Target. So Super Walmart, Super Target, they're largely going to form in the 1990s because there's all sorts of very, very cheap items that can be imported because tariffs are now low or they're non-existent if an item is made in Canada, the US, or Mexico. And this is going to have a very, very beneficial impact on the economy and contribute to a massive amount of economic growth. But there is a caveat. This is at the expense of the American factory worker. Because of outsourcing, a lot of factory workers lose their jobs. Like, for example, Mr. Ingles' father, who worked in a factory his whole life, lost his job when his factory that he worked for outsourced and moved their basis of operation to Mexico. So after that, he was never able to get a full-time job working in another factory again because they all closed down in Mr. Ingles' hometown, and he had to take up work as a janitor instead because he didn't have a 4-year degree. So, in response to NAFTA and GATT, there were a lot of benefits for the economy long term wise and for American consumers, but at the expense of individual people who may have lost their jobs if they were working in a factory due to outsourcing. And that was one of the negative aspects of this particular process in general. But another thing that President Clinton is going to have to deal with is a largely Republican Congress. He's going to have to square off against Newt Gingrich, who was Speaker of the House, very, very powerful Speaker of the House that challenged Clinton on lots of different fronts. When the U.S. government was shut down, Newt Gingrich was hoping that it would affect Clinton's popularity. It really didn't. But, battling back and forth and not being able to get legislation passed because of a majority of Republicans in Congress was something that Clinton struggled with in his second term, especially. There also was a problem with in Oklahoma City, and this was the Oklahoma City bombing emerged when Timothy McVeigh and a couple other domestic terrorists decided to blow up the the Oklahoma City building or a building in Oklahoma City, and this was a building that was that the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm Administration was very much so, you know, head. I don't know if it was headquartered out of, but had a large concentration of offices at. And the reason why Timothy McVeigh here, who was a white American who was opposed to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, he was retaliating against them because he was unhappy with their decision to raid a compound in Texas, in Waco, Texas, that was under the authority of David Koresh, who was a very, very deranged commune leader. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms went into the compound and they got in a heated exchange of gunfire between Koresh's followers, and most of his followers died. And so, in reaction to this, this is why he decided to blow up the ATF building in Oklahoma City, and he ended up killing several hundred people as well as children because there was a daycare in this building as well. Now, he was arrested rather quickly, found guilty, and executed for his terrorist action because he committed domestic terrorism, and he was executed and made an example of. He died by death by lethal injection because he decided to take the law in his own hands. And him and his, I believe, four other associates were found guilty of terrorist action. So this was an unfortunate side effect of, you know, anger and animosity and frustration with the U.S. government. So, in addition to that, even though President Clinton struggled significantly with the largely Republican Congress, because of the fact that the economy was doing so well, he's going to get elected to a second term. And a lot of the reason why the economy was doing so well is due to the productivity of the internet. And the internet started to become huge and went live and was available to the masses by 1994. And it's going to revolutionize technology. I mean, to put it in perspective, I can recall a time before the internet, and now that I've been exposed to it, you are the Gen Z, but sometimes you're nicknamed the I Gen or the internet generation because you've known nothing but the internet. And as a result, I can tell you I have lived before the internet and I've lived with the internet, and I would much rather live with the internet because the technology is amazing. It has made my life so much easier than I could have ever imagined. And it's going to open up the possibility for more jobs and more opportunities for millions of Americans. So it is a fantastic technology that I'm so grateful for. And it came out of the 90s. Yay! So as far as, not that it wasn't available prior to the 90s, but it became more widespread. And you have the linking of computers all over the country and all over the world by like 1994, which is fantasticness. But as far as the election of 1996, William Jefferson Clinton or Bill Clinton will win re-election. He's very popular. The economy is doing well, and that normally is what happens. Is if the economy is strong, it's very unlikely for an incumbent president not to win re-election. One of the things that he does do pretty well is that he ends up spending less money than what is taken in taxes, and then uses the extra budget surplus to start paying off some of the national deficit, which is really nice. I wish that further presidents could, and future presidents would have followed suit, but it doesn't matter. Democrat, Republican, after him, everybody likes to spend a lot more money than what's taken in taxes, and they don't ever pay down the principal of the cost, and they only really pay towards the interest, and that's not a good thing long term for the country. But probably the most important scandal that affects his administration is the Lewinsky affair. And I'm going to try and do this and make it somewhat PG-13 rated because it is quite gross. So I won't give you the rated R version of the story, but I'll try to give you the PG-13 version to explain the Lewinsky affair. Okay, so What was President Clinton impeached for in 1998? For lying about his inappropriate relationship with a White House intern who was at the time 23 years of age. So she was within the age of consent. So two consenting adults, even though it's not ethical, can have an extramarital affair. However, what made this affair so scandalous is not only did it happen in the Oval Office, but also because Clinton lied about it. And so did Miss Lewinsky, lied about their inappropriate relationship. Why did it matter? Well, Miss Lewinsky and President Clinton were called to testify in a sexual harassment civil lawsuit that was brought by this woman by the name of Paula Jones. Now, Paula Jones was a member, like she worked for Bill Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas. And she alleged that when he was governor of Arkansas, that he sexually harassed her, and she didn't really get anywhere in federal court, but as far as or in the criminal courts, so she decided to sue Bill Clinton in civil court for him allegedly sexually harassing her. And so because it takes a long time for these cases to evolve in the courts, Bill Clinton was giving testimony or depositions for this case while he was president, and so were people who worked underneath him, like Monica Lewinsky. They were called to testify at this deposition to prove that Bill Clinton had a history of a wandering eye and extramarital affairs to justify the alleged sexual harassment of Paula Jones. Well, so Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton testified under oath that they had not had a sexual relationship when in fact they actually had a sexual relationship with one another. How did this information come to light? Well, Monica Lewinsky decided to tell her best friend Linda Tripp all about her affair with the president. And even though, and the reason why Linda Tripp reported the affair to Kenneth Starr, who was an independent counselor who was investigating a different um, issue in the Clinton administration, and that investigation into a real estate scandal didn't really go anywhere. So, he told her because she was very, very much so upset about the fact that she was 23 and she felt as though President Clinton was taking advantage of her friend. Uh, there really wasn't much evidence to link the two together because there needed to be physical evidence if Ms. Lewinsky wasn't willing to testify against President Clinton. But as they continued conversing, Kenneth Starr pressed Linda Tripp, who brought the issue to his attention, to find some sort of physical evidence. And so Linda asked her best friend Monica, well, did you ever keep any mementos that could prove your relationship with the president? Well, she did. She kept a dress that had some presidential DNA on it. And so, you know, um, and she still had the dress that had presidential DNA on it. So when Linda Tripp told Kenneth Starr, he issued a warrant to search her apartment and then, charged her with perjury and threatened to imprison her if she didn't testify against Bill Clinton. And so, you know, um, they were able to match the DNA from a glass of water that he drank during the deposition to the DNA that was on her dress, and then prove that they, in fact, were romantically linked. And so when this information came to the public's attention, Bill Clinton should have come out and said, I did it and I'm sorry, and please forgive me, can we move on? Kind of like Ronald Reagan did with uh, you know, the Iran Contra affair. But no, he said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. And when the dress was produced, and the DNA was released, he had most definitely lied about the inappropriate relationship. So that's what he was convicted of, was lying under oath about their inappropriate relationship. But then he tried to argue his way around it, which was an interesting argument, saying that they did not have a sexual relation in the sense that it was um, the type of relationship that resulted in the creation of a child because they didn't have the type of relationship that they didn't have the kind of interaction that could create a child. They had all sorts of other types of interactions that were not child producing related. I know, confusing. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, other than, um, they didn't have the type of relationship that was defined as, you know, something that would happen between a man and a woman in the state of marriage. So, because they were just fooling around, let's put it that way, um, he argued that he didn't lie about their sexual relationship because what they were doing was not sex. Interesting argument. Didn't really get very far because, regardless, he lied about being intimate with her, and that was the issue, and that's why he was impeached. But there weren't enough votes to boot him from office. So very, very similar to Donald Trump when he was impeached the first time. Bill Clinton got to remain in office for the last 2 years of his presidency, but it did leave this whole incident a terrible stain on his presidency. Sorry about the pun. I can't help it because her dress was stained. I know, terrible. Okay, so that is my PG-13 version of explaining the Lewinsky affair. If you want the rated R version, look it up on your own. I'm not going there. It is disgusting. All right, but anyway, uh, this is the dress that had the presidential DNA on it, and this is the White House portrait. Apparently, the person who painted the portrait did it on purpose with the dress in the background because this was the dress that actually like physically linked the two of them together because she kept it and didn't dry clean it and it had a Clinton stain on it. It was really bad. So this incident will stay in his presidency indefinitely. It'll go down in history for being the second president impeached. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. That's not funny. But it is. Okay, so like it or not, second president in U.S. history ever to be impeached, doesn't get removed, and neither does Andrew Johnson, and neither does President Trump, but still historic nonetheless. So, uh, interesting, and history loves scandals, so it is a scandalous relationship and a scandalous affair that happens between the two of them, and it almost brought down his presidency. But he continues. In his second term, he does appoint Madeleine Albright as his Secretary of State. He presides over the formation of the European Union, which is going to um, be a important zone of free trade between all of the different countries in Europe. Also important for expanding trade. Uh, he is going to interact with Boris Yeltsin. But things will sour with the U.S. with the Russia after the ascension of Vladimir Putin. But that's another story. But the European Union is important, like I said, a big, huge economic zone of free trade between all these different countries. Yes, Great Britain is in the process of divorcing the EU as we speak, called Brexit. Who knows what economic implications that will have on Great Britain, but nonetheless, these countries were united economically as well as they were tied also economically with the euro dollar. Now, Great Britain never, used the euro dollar currency wise, but instead of having like French francs, so you have the same type of currency that can be used in most of Europe, if that makes sense. Okay, you also have, like I said, the globalization of trade, the emergence of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, to oversee trade agreements, enforce rules, and to settle disputes among countries that have problems economically. You have the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank that made loans to underdeveloped countries, so countries that whose economies are not nearly as strong as the U.S., for example. And you do have the development of the G8 summit. It's now G7 because Russia was expelled from it after they invaded Ukraine just a few short years ago. But when you have some of the larger industrial powers that meet um, to try and uh, iron out maybe economic differences to ensure that the global economy continues to function properly. So you do have the WTO, you have the World Bank, and these are all the different member nations in the World Bank, loaning money to other countries who financially could use it. And that, in short, is the information about the 1990s. I hope you enjoyed, and I will finish up talking about the 2000s next.